Viewers, the Finance Minister today spoke for just about 60 minutes in the newly inaugurated Lok Sabha. At the end of the 60 minutes, there were no tax breaks. Tax breaks, as you all know, viewers, are the unction applied by finance ministers to massage the arm voter. There were no bejeweled sops to the fastest growing political constituency, the woman voter. There wasn't even the standard oblation to the Annadata. Many had expected the Prime Minister to have offered a perfectly justifiable sweetening hike in the PM Kisan allocation upwards of rupees 8,000. It stands at 6,000. Inflation is after all caught up with the poor farmer in 5 years. There was no mad rush to propitiate the gods of sentiment on Dalal Street other than announcing the historic 11% capex spent. As it happens, the markets appears to be satisfied with the announcement, possibly because it signals a commitment to infrastructure development that is needed to propel an advanced economy. It's not as if many, certainly not the public, would have blamed the Modi government for doling out sops. After all, the BJP is resolved to decimate the opposition in a must-win, high-stakes general election. Viewers, the beauty of Finance Minister Sitharaman's interim budget is that it focused on the things that matter, viewers. Bravery doesn't matter, but it focused on the things that matter. Staying on the course of fiscal consolidation, deepening commitment to physical and social infrastructure, and signaling policy continuity, especially on the taxation and manufacturing front, to draw out private capital to spend in India, where after all, viewers, it is all happening. We are the only economy among the senior economies that is really leaping ahead. The Prime Minister said in his first comments that his government's budget has sought to empower the only caste that matter according to him, the youth, the women, the poor and farmers. Viewers, listen in to what the Prime Minister said, and then I'll talk you through the NDA's 10-year report card. But first, listen to it.
इंटरिम बजट तो है ही, लेकिन ये बजट इंक्लूसिव और इनोवेटिव बजट है। इस बजट में कंटिन्यूटी का कॉन्फिडेंस है। ये बजट विकसित भारत के 4 स्तंभ युवा, गरीब, महिला और किसान सभी को एम्पावर करेगा। निर्मला जी का ये बजट देश के भविष्य के निर्माण का बजट है। इस बजट में 2047 के विकसित भारत की नींव को मजबूत करने की गारंटी है। मैं निर्मला जी और उनकी टीम को बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं।
Now, viewers, let me talk you through a few of the highlights, not of this budget, but over the last 10 years. After all, viewers, the NDA has been in power for 10 years. This is the right opportunity to take stock of where they are ending their 10 years in office, preparing for, of course, the Lok Sabha elections that will begin in another 65-70 days. First week of April, you might just see the first leg, the first phase of the elections kick off. So if you go by that timeline, then you have about 70 days, viewers, 65-70 days. So let me just talk you through what they've achieved, at least what the Prime Minister and Nirmala Sitharaman claimed in that budget speech that the NDA has achieved. A 7% growth project for the third successive year. That's very, very crucial, viewers, because many people, including the government, hadn't expected a spike such as this. They had sort of been a little more conservative on the numbers, but the numbers finally seem to be exceeding even their own expectations. A shrinking fiscal deficit from 9.2% in FY21 to 6.4% in FY23, despite, viewers, growth a 3.3x rise in public sector capital investments in 2014. Huge, viewers. This is absolutely huge. It's transformational. And you can see the effects all around you as infrastructure comes up. India has grown to become the third largest fintech economy in the world. India is now the world's fourth largest stock market. Gross NPAs at 3.2%, which is a decadal low. Retail inflation within tolerance band of 2 to 6%. Viewers, that is quite significant. Record 8.18 crore ITRs filed for 2023-2024. So tax base has also increased. 34 lakh crore dispensed via direct benefit transfer. 51.6 crore Jan Dhan Yojana beneficiaries. 55% are women. It's very significant, viewers. And when the Prime Minister, in that bite that you just heard, talked about inclusivity, he said the budget is an inclusive budget and it is focused on Yuva, women, poor and farmers. He's not wrong. A close reading of the budget appears to bear this out. First, the budget announces a rooftop solar scheme that targets 1 crore households, mostly, viewers, in the rural areas. The idea is to help the households generate 300 units of free electricity monthly. Aligned with Prime Minister Modi's vision, this initiative targets annual savings of 15,000 to 18,000 rupees, promoting energy self-sufficiency per household and encouraging consumption elsewhere. This is very important, viewers. That money that will be saved will either be spent on a rainy day or, viewers, will help boost demand or consumption, which will obviously boost knock-on demand and, viewers, really push up the flagging rural economy. Right now, we have a bit of a problem there. The policy also marks a paradigm shift away from other models of governance that provide ruinous electricity subsidies at the cost of the exchequer. You know the state governments, viewers, dole out these concessions and it pinches them. So if this model works, it can be scaled up across the country. Second, the budget also announced that the government will increase the Lakpati Didi target from 2 crores to 3 crores. The term Lakpati Didi refers to women's members of self-help groups or SHGs who harness their entrepreneurial skills and earn a sustainable income of at least rupees 1 lakh per year per household. The scheme aims at fostering economic independence and women empowerment in 3 crore households. That's not a small number, it's a big number. It's a well-established fact that putting money in the hands of women has a knock-on effect on GDP. Some people even say it could be as much as about 1.5 percentage points. Third, to improve ease of living and ease of doing business, the interim budget has also provided relief to around 1 crore small taxpayers. Petty, non-verified, non-reconciled or disputed direct tax demands, many of them dating as far back as the year 1962, as the budget says, will now be closed, shut in one fell swoop. That's a massive relief. These demands have continued to remain on the books, causing anxiety to honest taxpayers and hindering refunds of subsequent years. So very, very critical. And that's really what we've summed up in the budget highlights this evening. Historic capex outlay of 11 lakh crores, expansion of metro rail, Namo Bharat to more cities, 3 railway corridors for energy, minerals, cement. All of this, viewers, will kickstart and continue to burn the engines of the economy. Airports to be doubled to 149. 5 integrated aqua parks will be set up. 2 crore homes in 5 years under rural house plan. Lakpati Didi, I was talking about, target from 2 crore to 3 crore. Scheme for housing for middle class soon. Rooftop solar scheme to benefit 1 crore. Interest-free loans to states to develop tourism. Viewers, clearly, the NDA shunned the lurch towards handing out ruinous raveries to realize its short-term electoral goals because perhaps it is confident that it has performed. The temptation to resist a massive splurge is also an admirable nod to propriety. An interim budget is, after all, an interim budget. It would be highly improper to treat it like a conveyor belt to deliver electoral bribes to the voter. The NDA's respect for form or convention is in stark contrast to the way the UPA approached the interim budget of 2014, their last budget as it turned out. The then beleaguered Congress-led coalition government announced a series of aggressive, across-the-board excise cuts to woo significant sections of the voting classes. It also rolled out the one rank, one pension policy to lure in politically significant armed forces constituency without telling us how they're going to fund that. They left that, the presumption that when they come to power, they'll explain. More than this, it was accused by many experts of dressing up the budget mat to make its performance look better on key macroeconomic indicators, especially managing the fiscal deficit. It was all highly irregular, viewers. In the end, the UPA's desperate tactics were rejected by voters. Now it remains to be seen if the NDA's quiet confidence will resonate. Fundamental questions tonight, viewers. We're going to open this up for a debate. We'll also be talking to some stakeholders, important ones. Sanjeev Sanyal will be joining us to put the budget into context in just a short while. But let me first open up with some of our panelists. Dipanshu Mohan, Director, Center for New Economics Studies, is here with us. Sanju Verma, National Spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Gurcharan Das, Senior Economist. None of these people, Nalin Mehta, none of them need an introduction. Managing Editor, Money Control, also an author, celebrated author, best-selling author. Sanjeev Srivastava, Senior Journalist. All are with us. And I want to first begin by putting this entire budget into some sort of context for our viewers, because a large number of you will be saying, where are the headlines? Gurcharan Das, where are the headlines? They'll be saying. Nalin Mehta, you're smiling. Where are the headlines? So this could not be a budget worth even commenting upon. But it is, viewers, isn't it? Nalin, let me begin with you first. It isn't it? It's a budget that does the right things at the right time for the right set.
So, Rahul, the headline we are carrying Money Control this evening is Confident Modi chooses prudence before the polls with a no surprise budget. I think what you're seeing is a workman-like interim budget. Historically, politically charged interim budgets have been outliers. The Prime Minister has chosen not to go in that outlier path. And I think the Prime Minister is very clear that the next budget, following the elections, is when a roadmap is going to be unveiled. Now, if you look at the messaging in the budget, you mentioned capex and the number you mentioned, but look at the percentage to GDP. It's 3.7%. 5 years ago, that was 1.7%. It's the highest ever. Now, of course, capex keeps rising every year, but when you see as percentage of GDP, the increase is very, very sharp. It's not just 11% from last year, but from 1.7% of GDP 5 years ago to 3.7% now. And that kind of gives you an indication of the wider vision behind it. If you look at PM Awas, for example, or the Ayushman Bharat Yojana, huge 2 crores more homes over the next 5 years. So I think you are seeing a focus on the 4 categories that the Prime Minister has outlined in the past as the 4 most important castes in India, which is women, farmers, poor and the youth. And you see the political framing of the budget within that, but within the larger rubric of a fiscally prudent budget.
Fiscally prudent budget, yes, that one headline that has attracted those who are responsibly commentating and are invested in India's success is the fact that we are pretty much on the glide path to meeting that fiscal deficit target. Gurcharan Das, let me bring you in on this. It's important. There are people, of course, who are saying that, look, the fiscal is looking better than what was even anticipated because perhaps the capex spend was not exhausted to what was budgeted last year. And there have been some cutbacks in other spends, education, health. So some people will look at it that from that perspective, but how do you see this budget, Gurcharan Das? What do you think,
I think
it is going to lead
look,
to?
I
Yes.
was relieved.
Yes, you were
because
relieved.
pre-election budgets are, even interim, are fraught with political risks. And I must say, this was not a political budget. This was a responsible budget. It continued what this morning I had indicated. It continued the growth paths. It was infrastructure spending leading to growth and jobs. And this is, there's a huge temptation before an election to dole out freebies. And this was not that kind of budget. So it requires guts to do this sort of thing, and I must say, I would have perhaps liked, little tweaks. I mean, I would have liked the fiscal deficit to come down a little more. I would have. I had hoped to come down at 5.3, 5.4, but still, it is sliding downwards, and it is. In fact, it's continuing the story. The real story is the continuity, and for the economy, continuity of policy is one of the best things that we can have, because it creates predictability for for consumers, predictability for producers, and the the bigger picture. So is definitely. I mean, I love this idea of rural homes with solar panels. I mean, those are the kind of visionary things that caught one's imagination, and certainly the women's part, I think, that you mentioned is also important. Um, the issues of the country still remain, however, and I think it's worth mentioning that this is the beginning, and whichever government comes to power has to follow this prudent fiscal path plus the growth orientation, because we still have to create an industrial revolution. 7% growth is remarkable. For 30 years, an average of almost 7% growth is impressive, and we should be proud of it.
Right.
But we have not created the jobs that come with 7% growth, and which is because we have not created an industrial revolution. So now we have to go back to basics. We have to do the reforms, the labor reform, the land reforms that were not done, but also other areas which require us in this difficult export environment, but we have to do it. We should go back, join RCEP, bring down our tariffs, join the global supply chains, um, and invest in education. Those are the basics
Okay.
that we need to do.
Let me
But
let me
I feel that we are on the right
We're on
track.
the right track. General direction is right. BJP spokesperson Sanju Verma, you're also an economist by training, so it's good to have you. Just wanting to ask you a simple, straightforward question here. Many people are saying that, look, they could afford not to have the bells and whistles, the sops and, the what have yous, because you've performed well and you're confident of coming back. Now, the opposition has said that, look, this just exudes a sense of arrogance, taking voters to, some degree of granted, etc., because there are problems. It's not as if, look, it's still a work in progress. Let's be honest about that. So there are problems. So how are you so confident that the voter will put you back in office in the next 4 months, 3 months, or what have you?
Thank you, Rahul. You have a great panel here. Good to be a part of it. Both Nalin and Mr. Gurcharan Das, they made some very interesting comments. I'll elaborate on those later. There is one point which both of them made which sort of resonated with me. But as we head into Lok Sabha 2024 elections, I think there are a couple of things that need to be said. You pointed out a few of them in your introduction. Yes, India today is the 4th largest stock market globally. For the last 1.5, 2 months odd, we are the best performing Asian currency. We are the 2nd largest smartphone market. We are the 3rd largest automobile market. We are the 2nd largest two-wheeler market. We are the 2nd largest steel producer. We are the 3rd largest energy producer. So far, so good. Now, in any economy, taking off from what Nalin said, the government capex has gone up from 1.7% to 3.7% of GDP. Is there room for more? Yes. But, there are 3 things that are important on which the economy basically runs, especially a developing economy like ours. There's household capex, there's corporate capex, and there's government capex. Now, the government has done a large part of the heavy lifting. That is precisely the reason you saw that government capex has gone up by more than 3.5 times in the last 9.5 years. Now, in sharp contrast, despite corporate tax being reduced from 30% to 22% in September 2019, and for new companies from 25% to 15%, and despite the minimum alternate tax also being brought down, from 18% to 15%, we've seen incremental corporate capex to the tune of 5 or 6, maybe 6.5, 7 lakh crore. Now, if that corporate capex also increases to 9, 10, 11 or 12 lakh crore, the multiplier effect that it will have on jobs, incomes and employment and by virtue of that on the GDP numbers will be phenomenal. So what I'm trying to say is that currently with only one key leg of the economy, the government doing the heavy lifting and household capex also being on track, and household capex I think is best judged by the fact that you have, for instance, a Maruti Suzuki which sells 1.65 lakh units a month, which means every minute Maruti is selling 5 cars. You have tractor sales which are on an average up 18 to 20% year on year. You have two-wheeler sales which are up 7 to 8% year on year. You are selling 20 lakh motorcycles every month. You are selling 38 to 39 lakh cars every year. So household consumption spending is on track. Government spending is absolutely phenomenally well on track. Corporate capex, I think, took a hit after you had 2 black swan events. One, the worst pandemic in over 100 years in 2019-20, and then you had the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But despite 2 black swan events, despite global headwinds, I say huge credit to Prime Minister Narendra Modi that he did not shy away from structural reforms. And I say this with full confidence that Modi did not engage in incrementalism. He went for the whole hog. And that is the reason when the world is struggling with 2% GDP growth, you have India which saw 9.1% growth 2 years back, 7.2% GDP growth last year, and in the first half of this financial year, we are already at 7.7%, and we are likely to end this financial year with 7.3 or 7.4%, which I think is excellent by any yardstick.
But many people continue to say that yes, there has been GDP growth, but it hasn't been equal. And perhaps one of the reasons why we haven't been in the 8% plus category, and I think Gurcharan Das made that point also in the morning, is because of 2 reasons really. One is that private consumption has been flagging, and there is evidence to suggest that. Number 2, there are just too many people working farm jobs. We need to ensure that manufacturing really takes off. That's the point that he made. Now, we'll discuss that. I just want to bring in Dipanshu Mohan. Dipanshu Mohan, where do you stand on this confidence that the government exudes about how it's done? And is it all that it's being made out to be?
So I'll thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's a pleasure to listen to some prominent figures who've been working in the discipline and areas across economics. I would just say this, that I think one of the things the finance minister did well with this budget was to keep continuing talking about the map of fiscal consolidation. There are 2 reasons for this, and allow me to just sort of explain why is this important. First, when you talk about a low growth trajectory, I mean, India's potential is anywhere between 8 to 9% grow over that level. When you're growing at a suboptimal level to that potential, it becomes very important that the outlays, that is the spending plan that you have, is consistent with the growth rate that you are at, which is right now around 6% or so. As a result, a lot of pressure would be on the government to sort of spend on almost everything possible, revenue, capital expenditure. Now, with the last few budgets, I think the pattern is very clear. The government prefers to go higher on capex based spending to feel that India needs a lot of physical infrastructural development. As a result of that, the government wants to invest that. The other spillover effect, which is what we traditionally called in neoclassical economics as multiplier effect of capex, is that the private investment would come in over time. That hasn't come through across sectors, and that's troubling. When I say troubling, because we see that wherever even the private sector is investing, the capacity utilization of that is roughly around 70%. I'll give you the example of manufacturing. Now, what it does is then puts even additional pressure on the government to spend more. That the government has clearly indicated today is that it's not willing to do that. There's a limited space to what the government can do. and it's wanting to continue on fiscal consolidation. The question we have to ask is, where does that additional investment come
from
to kickstart growth in India if you're really looking at a long-term vision? And for that, unless and until you open up the gates for two things, consumption-based spending and investment, nothing is going to happen. Now, for investment, the government has done cutting down corporate income tax year after year. A lot of leverage has been given to the corporate sector. For FDI, the government has, through PLI and many schemes. I was very surprised that PLI was not even mentioned today once, given how much the government has spent.
Yeah.
And it's public money, and we have to ask the question whether the scheme has.
And there has been a reluctance from the government to explain.
And I'm not saying that the PLI.
One second, Sanju, let him finish his point. I'll come to you.
I'm not saying that the net PLI hasn't done well.
Yeah.
What has happened is much of the manufacturing is happening with a high component of import-weighted goods.
Right.
As a result, we are importing way more than what we are exporting, which we see in the current account deficit. The final point here is, so if investment is not coming through, you need to make people to spend more.
Yeah.
I will only spend more even if my income is going up, or I have an additional job where which I'm additionally earning money. Now, 60% of the data that we see of income earners in India have not seen incomes rising, and the PLFS data is out there. I'm surprised how the PLFS data release was timed very close to this. The data is very critical on what the economy and the state of the economy is. If you look at 60% of the income earners have seen a real income decline or stagnation in real wages, which means that household savings, debt levels, household savings is going down, debt will go up, and that creates a problem for consumption demand. Where will 65% of the population, which is in the rural areas, going to spend that money? So you are dependent then on the 20% which are seeing an income rise, that's you and me, who are seeing an income rise, and we are spending on more coffee, more goods that we may want to spend on, and that will drive growth. It's doing that, but at much, much lower potential than what India can.
Okay, so let me quickly get Sanju Verma, who's raising a hand, to respond now, to open this up further to two of our other panelists. Yes.
Okay. It was nice to hear, the flip side of the story from Dipanshu Mohan. I disagree with him on a couple of points. Of course, there's always room for more. India has the potential to grow at 8, 9. Why 8, 9, even 10%, 11%? But you forget one very important thing. Earlier in the past, when India grew at say 6%, 7% or 8%, you had a very benign global geopolitical situation where interest rates were low, inflation was low, and yields were low. Now in the last 2 years, I'm sure Dipanshu Mohan will know this better than anyone else, yields, 10-year bond yields in the US were next to zero. In fact, in countries like Germany, Italy, France, etc., yields were negative. And suddenly, you have 10-year bond yield in the US at between 3.9 to 4.2%. Indian bond yields, which were at about 5.9%, are today at 7.1%. So the point I'm making is, against the backdrop of rising global bond yields, rising domestic bond yields, rising interest rates. Don't forget that till 3 years back, US was struggling to have 2% inflation. And 2 years back, at the height of the pandemic, US had 11% inflation. UK consistently had 12% inflation, the highest since 1970. Germany was seeing 11.9% inflation, the highest since 1967. So the limited point is, against the global backdrop of rising interest rates, rising inflation, and rising bond yields, for India to consistently grow at 7% plus is nothing short of a miracle, and that miracle hasn't happened by happenstance. That miracle has happened because the Modi government has put money into the hands of the public. Just 10 seconds. 34 lakh crore. When you say that this kind of money has been transferred to the poorest of the poor by way of direct benefit transfer, how much is 34 lakh crore? It is close to 7 to 8% of the GDP. That's not a small amount by any yardstick. So that is how the Modi government has brought growth back on track despite two debilitating black swan events.
Okay. Look, before we get enmeshed in a back and forth, I want to bring in both Sanjeev Srivastava as well as Gautam Chikkarmane, who's of course with the Observer Research Foundation. Now, Gautam Chikkarmane, look, there are two ways to skin this cat. And we have to ask ourselves, why aren't we growing 2 the expectation that we have of ourselves. Every time China adds 1% GDP, basically she adds a size of the Indian economy to her, roughly that. Now, I want to ask you, why is it that private capital expenditure is not happening, that business seems to be holding back? Is it only because of global reasons, or are there some problems here internally that haven't been fixed? And secondly, why is private consumption flagging to the point that it is? Why do we have 40% of our youth out of jobs? Youth, I said. Why are there so many people employed in the agricultural sector and not in industry?
About jobs, I don't know. I don't track jobs so closely, so I won't be able to give you any insights. But around growth, firstly, it's slightly, the statistics are slightly off. India is not, 1% in China's growth is not India's GDP. India's GDP has become much larger now. But having said that, the fact that private investment is not coming, there can be several reasons, not all of them attributable to the union government. First, I think if you are looking at factories need land, labor. I don't see companies not coming in because of lack of land or because of lack of labor, or because labor reforms haven't happened. Over the past 10 years, we've seen enough companies come and set up their factories. Why are they not coming at a faster pace is perhaps the question. And why aren't Indian companies expanding? That can be second part of the question. Now, Indian companies not expanding could be simply a matter of capacity utilization, as we discussed yesterday night, and which I repeat. Basically, I think Indian manufacturing is functioning at around 75 to 78% of capacity utilization. It may be linked to demand, but it could be the lack of exports, for instance, or it could be some other function. But if the capacity is not being utilized today, why would anybody put in more money? Second, I mentioned this yesterday, but I'm not very certain whether it's 100% accurate. I mean, I'm now introspecting and questioning myself. I don't see electoral uncertainty. Yesterday, I had said that perhaps because of electoral uncertainty, companies are holding back in order to see whether there will be policy continuity or not.
Right.
This budget, as we have seen, is completely continuing with all the policies of the past, investments in infrastructure, a better management of fiscal finances. I mean, I gave you the numbers. Let me give you some of them once again. Corporation taxes has gone up by 2 percentage points. Income tax, 2 percentage points of the budget. So income tax has seen an increase of 4 percentage points. Borrowings are down by 6 percentage points. All these are good fiscal indicators. So the fiscal management by this government has been and continues to be good. The incentives to the private sector have been there and continue to be there. Can more be done? Certainly. For instance, our regulatory framework is extremely, it's choking. And I think those reforms are going to come in case the Modi government returns to power. Within the next 2 quarters after that, you will see major compliance reforms. And so I think the bedrock is getting created for private investment.
Okay, let me bring in Nalin Mehta. That's an important point.
It's a very difficult question to answer right now. There are just too many moving parts. I agree there is global stress. I agree that the liquidity has sort of worn off, etc.
Okay.
But I'm not very confident about either this is the reason or this is not the reason at this moment, because of the moving data points do not point to any conclusive evidence. My sense is that given the government capital expenditure over the past few years, it's about time, maybe 1 quarter, maybe 2 quarters, that you will see private investment coming.
Okay, so let's get into, let's ask Sanjeev Srivastava, Nalin, as well as come back to the director of the CNES, who's here in the studio with us, Dipanshu Mohan. Sanju Verma, I'll come to you for concluding comments. And of course, there is Gurcharan Das. So let's just quickly go through all our panelists. I want to look a little forward. Okay, fine. The Modi government has done well enough to warrant another term in office. At least that's what it thinks, Nalin. What do you see the Modi government doing to bite the reforms bullet? Where is it going to go, and will it be dependent on fundamentally the quality of the victory?
So, look, I think of course the quality of victory matters. But as we were discussing this morning in this studio, the Modi government already has a very strong majority. So what can you do with 320, 330, 340 that you can't do with 303? Having said that, I think there is a very clear thinking within the highest levels of the government that there has to be an increase in the women participation of the workforce. Women are a very key component of the political economy push by the Prime Minister. Now, you in the last 3 or 4 years, see, China grew, Rahul, as you know, not just by being the back-end manufacturer of the world, but by increasing domestic demand and domestic consumption. Now, in the last 5 years, we've become a major exporter of electronics. We've become 10-11% of domestic of production of iPhones, for example. Now, several companies want to set up a base in India. Now, there are issues around labor, there are issues around women participation. That might require tweaking labor codes, for example. Now, that is something that you can't tackle in an interim budget, but perhaps in a larger budget. And also, how do you do it? I mean, that's where the rub lies. It's also a concurrent subject. So, I think in terms of increasing private investment, in terms of creating the conditions for much more job creation on large scale, you're seeing a lot of moves right now, Rahul, for example, on privatization of defense, with private-public partnerships. So many of those are areas where the government would, I think, would be looking to expand.
Would be looking to expand. Okay, let me quickly bring in Sanjeev Srivastava. He hasn't had a word in Gurcharan Das. Sanjeev Srivastava, look, at the end of the day, the government made it a priority. And this is where I need to ask you, because I remember the rhetoric that came through. Reforms are not easy. They do have an impact on people's lives, especially if they're disruptive. Now, I remember the government said that it was very keen to boost farm incomes, double them, all sorts of numbers were thrown up. Farm laws were brought out. We saw the opposition play sort of a hypocritical role, because a large number of opposition parties had promised the same reforms, and unfortunately that didn't quite, they didn't quite play it that way when it came to the crunch. They opposed them. Land reforms, the same story. How much do you think the quality of the victory is going to determine Mr. Modi's hand? Will it give him confidence?
Well, I hope it does. But the quality of victory was no less substantive when the last time these rollbacks on farm laws or land reforms happened. Because that's a very sensitive political issue. To take that head on, whether immediately after the election or midway through your tenure, it's a difficult one. And I don't envy Mr. Modi or his government for doing what they did. It's very difficult to take those unpopular steps in what are unpopular in larger public opinion. Now, a couple of things I'd like to say very quickly. I wish I was as enthused about the budget as so many on the panel are. Yes, it's responsible. Yes, it's prudent. Yes, it marks continuity. There are no pleasant or unpleasant surprises. It's all a work in progress kind of a budget, very methodical and things. But the couple of points you made, despite lowering corporate taxes to never before seen levels in this country, and despite actually introducing all the NCLTs and write-offs, still private investment hasn't picked up. Why? That's a big question. The government needs to look into it, find out the answers.
Okay.
And the other question which nobody is talking about, just 10, 20 more seconds, is what about personal income taxpayers? What do you think, Rahul? Person who is earning 15 lakhs is a very rich guy. He pays up 30% tax plus surcharge, and then you pay GST and all the other taxes. You end up paying 40-45% of your income in taxes.
Right.
And that's great, because middle class doesn't count. And there is nobody who is there to raise their voice, despite so many middle class people sitting on this panel only. So why don't we talk about it? Why are we the highest taxed people on planet Earth or amongst them?
I'm not going to speak for the government, but there is a logic to that. They'll say that, look, they've been able to keep inflation low. There have been other bump on knock-on effects of other policies,
taxing middle
etc.
classes.
No, I mean fundamentally better management of.
What that management is, you reduce corporate tax.
Okay,
to
let me open
these
this
kind
up.
of
Let's ask those two questions. Why has private
levels
investment
and
not come to?
corporates actually
Sanju
don't
Verma,
even pay
you'll get the
25%. They end
last.
up paying around 5
Yes,
to 10%.
I agree with you. Look, it's a pain point for a lot of Indians. I agree with you.
It's a
So let me bring in.
complete killer
Okay,
year after year,
okay.
regardless of UPA,
Okay,
NDA,
Dipanshu
Modi,
Mohan.
earlier Prime Minister.
Dipanshu Mohan, very
The
quickly.
middle classes are rogered.
Very quickly, middle classes are rogered. Now, whether they don't constitute a unified vote bank, there are several other issues there, but nonetheless, no interest there. And private investments flagging why?
Yeah, so I think I'll just very quickly say that I think we made a very important point, and most of the panelists have said this, that factor market reforms, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and to fifth extent, technology, digital public infrastructure.
Right.
A couple of things can be taken care by the union government, but most are left to the states. Now, there are states in India which are receiving a lot of private investment. You want to know which state? Tamil Nadu. Manufacturing GSDP in Tamil Nadu right now is in double digits. If you look at the union level manufacturing contribution to GDP, it was 22.5% in 2013-15 period.
Okay.
Between 2019 to right now, it's 22.7. Manufacturing growth has not picked up in India, not just in the last decade. If you
But
look
let's
at
get into the reasons.
the reason is
statistics,
because see what data does it tells you what's not happening at the national level may be happening at some states. Now, what is happening in a particular set of states which are attracting that capital, which is not happening in another state? Now, this has to do with the socio-economic position of the states and also of the skill sets of the underlying disposed workers that are available. So, talk about UP. Noida, the part where we are, has more access to Delhi, which would get a lot more capital as against Greater Noida.
So what's the point? What's the point?
The point is that you are not investing enough in ensuring to the private sector that attracting capital to a particular region will ensure workers across skill sets to be absorbed within that. And I think Tamil Nadu or a state like that has made sure of that.
Sanju Verma, quick response.
Yes.
Yeah, Sanjeev Sanyal waits for us. Right. Yes.
I just have this to say. People who say that nothing has been done for the middle class, very quickly. This is the first government which actually brought down the tax rate from 10% to 5% in the 2.5 to 5.5 lakh category. We raised the basic exemption limit from 2 lakhs to 2.5 lakhs and then 3 lakhs per annum. We increased the tax deductible limit, from 1 lakh to 1.5 lakh under 80C. Under section 24B of the Income Tax Act for rental income paid, we increased the tax deductible limit from 24,000 to 60,000 rupees per annum. But most importantly, which nobody here in this panel has said, I think we removed and did away with the draconian retrospective taxation which was introduced in 2012. We did away with Chidambaram's legacy of the dividend distribution tax, which was actually hurting corporates and companies and mutual funds.
Sanju Verma. Sanjeev Sanyal will disappear if I don't go to him right now. I'm sorry, we've had a good interplay. I'm sorry I have to cut you off. I just have to go straight across. Thank you for taking the time out, Mr. Sanyal. I know it's a busy day for you. How do you respond to the criticism that the interim budget is hollow? The speech was the shortest ever and it pays lip service to welfareism. Straight question.
First of all, if the main criticism is that the length of the speech was not especially long, then I don't know how I can even take it seriously. The fact is that this is an interim budget, as you yourself said. It's a vote on account. And I think the real message is that, look, no populist freebies, solid conservative performance, and in fact suggesting that the fiscal deficit has in fact been lower even than what had been budgeted, and forecasting forward that it will fall from 5.8 to 5.1% of GDP in the coming year. So all told, a solid conservative signaling that we are serious about macro stability. I don't know what exactly else should be expected
I'll tell you.
an interim budget.
Okay, I'll tell you what. it is an election year. Are you surprised that there are no populist headlines emerging from this exercise? No big ticket sop, so to speak. Does that surprise you?
So, as everybody knows, I mean, the budget for this year, the proper budget for this year will be presented in July. The key thing that the Finance Minister is doing, which is quite correct, is signaling that this is an interim budget. We will do a vote on account, and we will not do what many people may encourage, which is try and do various kinds of populist things. They have not done that, held the ship steady. This is a very good signal that we take macro stability seriously, and of course as far as the helping the poor and so on is concerned, there is a 10-year track record of directly helping the poor with all kinds of support, whether it's PM Awas Yojana for housing, or the toilet scheme, or direct benefits transfer, and so on. And by the way, those are all being continued. So even in this speech there was clear mention of all of these things. But if anyone is to judge this government, they should judge it on the track record of the last 10 years, not on some announcement, which in any case is an interim announcement till the real budget comes up in July.
But implicit in what you're saying, Mr. Sanyal, is the confidence that you're coming back to power. Many people are accusing you of being slightly arrogant and taking the people for granted. How do you respond to the opposition on that charge?
Well, I mean, I can't respond to political rhetoric. If the Honorable Finance Minister is confident of coming back, well, that's her statement. I mean, as an economic analyst, I can't comment on it.
Okay. Well, Sanjeev Sanyal, thank you for speaking to me this evening. I want to now cut across to V. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor, who's now joining us. Mr. Nageswaran, simple and straightforward question to you. Are you expecting, after this budget exercise, what, for example, is the top line for you? What would be the headline in tomorrow's newspapers? And some people are saying that the reason why you have been able to achieve these fiscal numbers is because there have been certain cutbacks. CAPEX, the budgeted estimate, fallen short, cutbacks in education, cutbacks in health, and certain other sectors of society, the allocations for them, especially those on the marginalized side of things. How do you respond to that, sir?
There are no cutbacks. Many of the items of expenditure are growing naturally. When the nominal GDP is growing at 10.5%, some sectors will grow more, some sectors will grow less, but many of the sectors on the social side also have a large state government's expenditure component as well. So it is not that budget consolidation is being achieved at the expense of social sector spending. That is one. Two, states have a big role to play in social sector outcomes. Three, the government did announce a 5-year extension of the Prime Minister's Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, and it has also announced an extension, increase in the target for Prime Minister's Awas Yojana Grameen from 2 crore homes to already 3 crore homes completed, by another 2 more crores. And Lakpati Didi, the target has been raised from 2 crores to 3 crores, etc. So, and if you look at the number of educational institutions set up in the last 10 years, whether it is medical or engineering colleges, or for that matter, management institutions, number of universities, you see it in the outcomes in terms of gross enrollment ratios. So, in general, this government has been not about outlays, but about increasing the efficiency of the outlays and translating them into outcomes. And that is what that is why it was able to achieve saturation coverage of COVID vaccination and direct benefit transfers, while other countries which opened their fiscal taps in an unlimited manner were not able to achieve the kind of outcome that India was able to achieve. Therefore, concern for economic and inclusive development does not necessarily mean only higher outlays, but it also in terms of effectiveness of implementation.
Well, I'll leave it at that, Mr. Nageswaran. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Let me take a very short break here, viewers. Fundamentally, the big takeaway tonight, workman-like budget, as Nalin Mehta put it, a budget that exudes confidence in performance and an extremely continuity-orientated message being sent out not just to industry, but also, of course, viewers, to voters. Viewers, let's go straight across and get an opposition point of view. We are joined by Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, three-time MP, Parliament, also member of the Standing Committee on Commerce. Dr. Singhvi, your first reaction to this budget, the interim budget, vote on account.
Well, the most charitable thing which can be said about it is only a vote on account, an interim budget, and therefore we don't expect it to be very historical or substantive or big. That, of course, is true. But then when you have a program to discuss the budget, you cannot help but say that even in an interim budget, you're supposed to be doing some things, minimal things maybe, medium-term things maybe, but still some things for the good of the country. Now, the best thing with this budget is done is a short budget speech. Hasn't done much more. There is, for example, a mention I noticed of caste twice in that speech, but not a word about unemployment. My colleague has given you today in the press in the day the figures for urban unemployment, rural unemployment, graduates below 25, graduates from 30 to 34. I'm not going to bore you with figures, but it's a serious problem the country has. There is unfortunately nothing by way of talking about it, giving even a minimalist plan for employment generation, etc. The other thing, Rahul, I would say is that there is a very strange list I have of about almost 25-30 items where there is underspending. It's peculiar. They make a lot of noise, but a major set of schemes, almost 20 in number, and I'm not going to give you the details, from Ayushman Bharat Mission to Swachh Bharat Mission, Grameen or urban, to Pradhan Mantri Ayushman Bharat Health Infrastructure, to modernization of police forces. The list goes on. There is huge underspending. In some underspending, in other words, allocated X and spent 33% less, 25% less. So that shows somewhere that there is a mismatch between planning, execution, intention, and there is no question of allocating such monies if you have not planned in advance for spending them properly. And lastly, Rahul, there are some good things which caught my eye, and I have no hesitation in saying. For example, the National Health Mission has increased slightly, not much, but slightly. In particular, I like the increase of world-class institutions expenditure, a particular head, by 500 crores. But these are sort of, somewhat cosmetic and minimalist positives against largely a very insipid, almost a forgettable, highly forgettable event.
Thank you, Dr. Singhvi. I've run out of time, unfortunately. I would love to have spoken to you at length, but thank you very much for joining us and putting your point across. It's always important, viewers, to hear the opposition point of view. I'll go straight across now to Anand Narasimhan, who is there with the right stand.